Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be, dissecting some stuff from a dating advice program aimed at men.
Right.
And, before anyone thinks we're giving dating advice, that is absolutely not the case.
No, not at all, in fact.
It's not what we do here.
We're looking at this as a fascinating cultural artifact. We're going to be dissecting the psychology behind it, how it reflects certain societal norms at the time it was made.
Yeah, so think of it as almost like an anthropological study
Yeah,
of masculinity and attraction and even self-esteem.
absolutely.
And you might be surprised by how much of this applies to everyone, not just men who are trying to, navigate the dating scene.
Yeah, the principles we're going to be exploring today, from self-perception to the dynamics of social interaction, they're relevant to all of us, regardless of your gender or relationship status.
For sure, for sure. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit. The speaker starts off with a pretty bold claim. He argues that in a society where basic needs are met, all desire essentially boils down to a desire for self-esteem. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's interesting when you think about it, the things that people gravitate towards, from status symbols to specific types of partners, it does seem like there's this common thread of wanting to feel good about ourselves.
Right, yeah. And he even goes on to say, that getting a woman's approval is similar to, acquiring like a luxury car or a big house.
Right.
It's all about achieving a certain level of perceived status.
Yeah, and that's where this concept of the gift of self-esteem comes into play.
Okay.
He says that's the ultimate way to attract someone, is by making them feel validated.
Okay, it makes it sound so simple.
Yeah.
Almost like giving self-esteem is this magic potion for attraction. But I can't help but wonder, can this approach become manipulative? Like, where do we draw the line between genuine appreciation and using validation as a way to get what we want?
I mean, that's a really important point. Validation can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It taps into our fundamental human need to feel seen and to feel valued. But there's a danger in seeking validation solely from external sources.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. When we become dependent on other people to prop up our self-worth, we risk falling into these patterns of codependency or even settling for relationships that don't truly serve us.
Yeah. He also keeps mentioning this is effect. What exactly is he talking about?
It's a rather crude term that he uses to describe the feeling a woman experiences when she feels cheapened or used in the context of a romantic or sexual encounter.
Okay, so he's basically saying that there's a right and wrong way to approach attraction, and if you mess it up, you trigger this, negative reaction.
That's the gist of it. He frames attraction as this strategic game, where you need to learn the right techniques to win.
Right, okay.
But this does raise some ethical concerns.
Right, because if you're constantly focused on winning, are you genuinely connecting with the other person?
Yeah.
Or are you more focused on the outcome than the actual relationship?
And that's where I think the source materials approach, while intriguing, might fall short. It really seems to tap into that scarcity principle, where limited availability increases perceived value.
Right.
And that can create attraction, but genuine connection requires authenticity.
Yeah. So if you're playing games and manipulating the situation just to appear scarce, eventually that facade is going to crumble.
Precisely. Trust is essential for any meaningful relationship,
Yeah.
and manipulation just erodes that foundation.
For sure. Another term that he uses frequently is superiority.
Right.
And he seems to suggest that you need to come across as superior to be attractive to women. So what exactly does he mean by superiority? Is he talking about like actual dominance, or is it more about projecting a certain image?
That's where things get a little bit murky. He never explicitly defines what he means by superiority, but it seems to encompass this blend of confidence and self-assuredness and a strong sense of self-worth.
Okay, so is it less about being objectively better than others and more about cultivating a mindset where you recognize your own value and project that confidence outwards?
I think that's a much more nuanced and healthier interpretation.
Yeah.
True confidence isn't about putting other people down. It's about knowing your worth and not needing that external validation to feel secure.
Yeah, but I wonder if there's a risk of this becoming like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure.
If you constantly focus on projecting this image of superiority, doesn't that create a distance between you and the other person?
That's a valid concern. Authentic connection thrives on vulnerability and genuine interaction. So if you're constantly putting up this front, it can hinder the development of a truly meaningful bond.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And that brings us to another key point in the source material, his emphasis on emotion over logic.
Right.
In the realm of attraction, he even uses that classic Pepsi versus Coke example
Hmm.
to illustrate his point.
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy because in blind taste tests,
Mm.
people might prefer Pepsi.
Right.
But when it comes to actually making a purchase, they often reach for Coke,
Yeah.
driven by brand loyalty and those emotional associations.
Right. So he's arguing that when it comes to attraction, people aren't as rational as they think they are. You know, they're driven by gut feelings and subconscious biases and emotional responses.
Exactly. It highlights that power of emotion in shaping our choices,
Yeah.
even when we think we're making logical decisions.
Yeah. He also talks about how evoking strong emotions, excitement, intrigue, even a touch of playful challenge is key to sparking attraction.
Yeah, it's about tapping into that primal emotional wiring think,
Mm-hmm.
about why we're drawn to movies or art.
Right.
It's that emotional roller coaster they take us on.
Right, I get it. But this whole idea of playing with a woman's emotions to create attraction seems a bit manipulative, doesn't it? Do women really enjoy that?
That's a very complex question.
Yeah.
I think what he's suggesting is that women enjoy a bit of playful resistance,
Yeah.
a bit of a challenge in the dating process.
Okay.
But this treads a very fine line.
Right, because it's one thing to be playful and engaging, but it's quite another to intentionally withhold affection or create unnecessary drama
Right.
just to keep someone interested.
Exactly. The key here is authenticity. If you are genuinely busy, you have a fulfilling life outside of dating, and you're
Yeah.
discerning about who you invest in, that naturally creates a sense of scarcity.
Right, so it's less about playing games and more about having your own life in
Oh,
order and being selective about who you choose to spend your time with.
Precisely. And that kind of genuine self-assuredness is far more attractive
Yeah.
than any sort of manufactured scarcity.
Okay, he also differentiates between inner game and outer game. Can you explain what he means by that?
So he describes inner game as your mindset, your confidence, your self-belief.
Okay.
It's your internal landscape, whereas outer game encompasses the techniques, the actions, how you present yourself to the world.
Right, so it's like that classic saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
You need to cultivate your inner strength and confidence before you can effectively project it outwards.
That's a great way to put it. He suggests that you can't truly fake confidence. Eventually, your inner state will reveal itself.
Yeah, but he also emphasizes the importance of cultivating a superior self-concept. Isn't there a danger in that becoming a bit delusional?
There's a fine line between building healthy self-esteem and veering into arrogance or an inflated sense of self.
Right, it's all about finding that balance between self-awareness and self-improvement.
Exactly. We should strive to become the best versions of ourselves, not out of a need to feel superior to others, but because it's intrinsically rewarding to live in alignment with our values, Right.
and
to pursue growth.
Okay, so we've unpacked a lot of the speaker's core concepts. You know, this idea that all desire stems from self-esteem, the importance of validation, framing attraction as a game, the S effect, the concept of superiority, and the interplay of emotions and logic. So where do we go from here?
Now that we understand these foundational ideas, I think it's time to delve into the practical application of his advice
Okay.
and see how it holds up in real-world scenarios.
All right, stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore those practical tips and dissect the nuances of how they might play out in real life. Welcome back. So we've kind of dissected some of the core concepts from this dating advice program, and now I'm curious to see how those actually translate into, like, actionable advice.
Yeah, that's a crucial step.
Right.
We've explored the philosophy now. Let's look at the practicality.
Yeah.
So the speaker talks a lot about cultivating what he calls superior intrinsic value. What exactly does he mean by that?
Yeah, intrinsic value sounds pretty deep. Is he talking about, having a fancy car or a prestigious job, or is it something deeper?
No, it's definitely not about material possessions.
Okay.
He's talking about cultivating those qualities that make you genuinely valuable and attractive as a person.
Okay.
It's about who you are at your core,
Yeah.
the traits that make you stand out from the crowd.
Okay, so we're talking about character confidence, skills, maybe a sense of humor.
Exactly. He uses this metaphor of the golden calf, someone who just exudes a certain magnetism and energy that draws people in.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, but how do we actually cultivate this superior intrinsic value? Like, is there a secret formula?
It's less about following a formula and more about embodying certain traits that are universally appealing.
Okay.
He talks about dominance,
Okay.
not in an aggressive sense,
Right.
but in terms of being comfortable taking the lead and making decisions.
Okay.
Leadership, a confident sense of humor, and being decisive are also key.
Okay, so it's about owning your strengths, being comfortable in your own skin and not being afraid to show your true self.
Precisely. It's about projecting that aura of self-assurance
Yeah.
that makes people feel comfortable and excited to be around you.
Okay. I like that he also talks about the importance of reframing negative beliefs, turning perceived weaknesses into strengths.
Absolutely.
Can you give us an example of how that might work?
Sure. Let's say someone is self-conscious about going bald instead of trying to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
They could embrace it by shaving their head completely. This shows that they're not afraid to stand out, and they're not defined by these conventional standards of beauty.
Yeah, I like that it's like turning a perceived negative into a statement of confidence,
Exactly.
self-acceptance.
It's about owning your unique qualities and projecting this air of, this is me, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And that kind of authenticity is incredibly attractive.
He also stresses the importance of surrounding yourself with positive influences.
Right.
Kind of like the saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
That's a great point. The people we spend our time with have a huge impact on our mindset and our energy.
Yeah.
So surrounding yourself with people who are supportive, inspiring, and challenge you to grow is essential for cultivating a strong inner game.
Yeah, so ditch the energy vampires and find your tribe of awesome people.
Exactly. It's about building a support system that reinforces your positive beliefs and helps you stay on track with your goals.
Oh.
So now let's talk about the practical side of interacting with someone you're attracted to. You know, he mentions escalating the interaction, but he also stresses the importance of avoiding that S effect
Right.
that he talked about.
Right.
So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, that seems tricky. It sounds like you need to walk a tightrope between, showing your interest,
Yes.
but not coming on too strong.
It's a delicate dance for sure.
Yeah.
It's all about being respectful, reading the signals, and not making assumptions.
Okay.
It's also crucial to understand that women are often conditioned to play a certain role in the dating game.
What do you mean by that?
Well, women are often expected to be more passive, to wait for the man to make the first move,
Right.
and not appear too eager.
Right.
So it's about being aware of those societal pressures and navigating them in a way that feels authentic and respectful.
Right. So being confident but not aggressive, taking the lead, but also being sensitive to her cues.
Exactly. And finding that sweet spot where you're guiding the interaction without making her feel pressured or uncomfortable.
He also suggests using playfulness and role-playing as a way to break the ice and make things feel less serious.
Yeah, it's about injecting some humor and lightheartedness into the interaction.
Right.
Imagine you're in a bookstore and you bump into a woman and she drops a book.
Right.
Instead of just picking it up, you could playfully say something like, "That's a pretty smooth move trying to get my attention."
Yeah, I see how that could create a fun, flirty vibe without being overly aggressive.
Exactly.
It's like you're both in on the joke.
It's a way to establish a connection and spark a conversation without putting too much pressure on the interaction. He also mentions that women are generally very good at reading social cues
Right.
and understanding subtext.
Okay.
So paying attention to those unspoken messages you're sending is just as important as the words you're saying.
Right. It's like you're broadcasting a signal.
Yes.
And if your words and your actions aren't aligned, people will pick up on that.
Precisely. That's where congruency comes in. If you're genuinely confident and comfortable in your own skin, that will come across loud and clear, regardless of what techniques you're using.
Right. It's about being authentic, not putting on an act.
Exactly. And this authenticity is magnetic because it cuts through all the noise and makes you stand out from the crowd. Another interesting point he makes is that you shouldn't eject from an interaction too quickly, even if a woman seems initially hesitant or gives off a not interested vibe.
Okay, so he's basically saying, don't give up too easily.
Yeah.
But how do you know when a woman is genuinely not interested versus when she's just playing hard to get?
That's a valid question. And remember we talked about how women are often conditioned to play hard to get even if they're interested?
Right.
It's a way of protecting their image and not appearing too easy.
Okay, so it's about reading the subtle cues.
Yeah.
Is her body language closed off, or is there a hint of playfulness in her eyes? Is she completely disengaged, or is she giving you some subtle signs that she's open to continuing the conversation? Exactly.
It's about trusting your gut, but also being respectful of her boundaries.
Yeah.
You don't want to be pushy, but you also don't want to miss out on a potential connection because you misinterpreted her signals.
Right. So it's all about balance. He also talks about taking responsibility for the interaction,
Yes.
including the sexual escalation. But doesn't that seem a little old-fashioned?
It's not about being old-fashioned.
Okay.
Remember, he's speaking to a male audience
Right.
who may have been brought up with certain ideas about masculinity and dating.
Yeah.
What he's trying to convey is the importance of being proactive.
Okay.
and guiding the interaction in a way that feels safe and comfortable for both parties.
Right, so it's about being clear about your intentions and creating a space where she feels respected and empowered to make her own choices.
Exactly. It's about understanding the dynamics at play and navigating them with sensitivity and awareness.
He uses a pretty strong metaphor here, comparing the way a man makes a woman feel to being a crack cocaine dealer of self-esteem. That's a
Ah.
pretty intense image.
He definitely uses strong language to make a point.
Yeah.
He's emphasizing that emotions are powerful,
Yep.
and we're all drawn to experiences that make us feel good.
But it's not about manipulating someone's emotions for your own gain.
No.
It's about creating a positive, exciting experience where both people feel good.
Exactly. It's about being a source of positive energy, making her feel good about herself,
Yeah.
and seeing where the connection leads.
He also talks about not being too quick to give validation, like keeping the carrot dangling a bit.
Right, this goes back to that scarcity principle.
Right.
We discussed earlier, if you're constantly showering someone with compliments and attention,
Yeah.
it loses its impact.
Right.
It becomes predictable and the excitement fades.
So it's about finding that balance between expressing your interest and maintaining a bit of mystery and challenge.
Exactly.
But where does the actual connection fit into all of this? We've talked about techniques and strategies and even manipulating emotions. Isn't that the opposite of genuine connection?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore in our final part.
All right, stay tuned as we delve into the deeper implications of this dating advice and discuss how to apply these insights in a way that feels authentic and empowering. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this dating advice program. And, we've covered a lot of ground, like from self-esteem to scarcity. We've encountered some pretty interesting metaphors.
Yeah.
But I'm still wrestling with this question, where does genuine connection fit into all of this?
That's the heart of the matter, isn't it? Because ultimately, we're not just trying to win at dating.
Right.
We're all seeking these meaningful connections,
Right.
relationships that bring us joy and fulfillment.
So how do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory ideas?
Yeah.
On one hand, we're talking about techniques and strategies and, this idea of playing the game, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, we're talking about authenticity and vulnerability.
Right.
Those seem like opposing forces.
It's a balancing act,
Yeah.
for sure. I think the key is recognizing that these techniques and strategies are simply tools.
Okay.
And like any tool, they can be used for good or for ill.
Right. So it all comes down to intention.
Exactly.
If you're using these techniques to manipulate or control someone, that's obviously not a recipe for a healthy relationship.
Right.
But if you're using them to express your interest in an authentic way, to spark a conversation and see if there's a genuine connection, that's a different story.
Precisely. It's like learning a new language.
Yeah.
You need to understand the grammar, the vocabulary, the structure.
Right.
But once you've mastered those basics,
Yeah.
you can use that language to express yourself in countless ways,
Yeah.
to tell stories, to share ideas, to connect with others on a deeper level.
Right. So these techniques are like the building blocks
Yeah.
of communication and attraction.
Mm-hmm.
But it's up to us to use them in a way that feels aligned with our values
Exactly.
and our goals.
And that's where the real power lies. It's not about following a script or becoming some caricature of what you think you should be.
Right.
It's about using these tools to enhance your natural charm, to express your unique personality, and to connect with others in a way that feels genuine.
But I feel like a lot of this advice can feel pretty performative.
Yeah.
How do we make sure we're not just putting on an act?
I think that's where the inner game becomes so crucial. It's about cultivating self-awareness, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, and being comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, because if you're not comfortable with yourself, no amount of techniques or strategies
Right.
will make up for that. It'll just feel like you're wearing a mask.
You hit the nail on the head. People can sense that incongruence.
Yeah.
They can tell when someone is trying too hard when they're not being genuine.
So the real work starts within.
Absolutely.
It's about building that foundation of confidence, self-love, and self-acceptance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that involves challenging that negative self-talk, reframing those limiting beliefs, and cultivating a sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation.
Right, because if you're constantly seeking validation from others, you'll never feel truly confident and secure.
And that insecurity will inevitably seep into your interactions no matter how hard you try to mask it.
Yeah.
It's about becoming the best version of yourself, not to impress others, but because it feels good to live in alignment with your values.
He also talks a lot about, understanding a woman's perspective, like being aware of that S effect
Yeah.
and the societal pressures that she might be facing.
Empathy is crucial not just in dating, but in all aspects of life.
Right?
Taking the time to understand where someone else is coming from, to see the world through their eyes, that fosters compassion and connection.
Right. It's not just about applying techniques. It's about recognizing the other person as a complex
Oh,
individual
yeah.
with their own experiences, their own
Mhm.
beliefs, and their own vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And that awareness allows us to communicate in a way that feels sensitive and respectful, even when navigating those potentially charged situations.
He also emphasizes taking responsibility for the interaction, especially when it comes to sexual escalation. But how do we balance, taking the lead with respecting a woman's boundaries?
Clear communication is key. It's about expressing your interest, directly being upfront about your intentions,
Mm.
and paying close attention to her verbal and nonverbal cues.
So it's not about pressuring her into anything she's not comfortable with.
Right.
It's about creating a space where she feels safe to express her own desires and where both parties feel respected and empowered.
Precisely, it's about co-creating the experience rather than one person dictating the terms.
So we've really dissected the psychology of attraction, the influence of emotions, and the importance of balancing that inner work with the outer techniques.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that these insights extend far beyond the realm of dating.
Right.
Understanding these dynamics of attraction, self-esteem, and social interaction can be applied to all areas of life,
Right.
from our careers to our friendships.
I totally agree. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most valuable lesson is the awareness this deep dive has brought. By understanding the forces at play, the subconscious biases, the cultural conditioning, the emotional triggers,
Right.
we can make more conscious choices in our interactions. We can choose to cultivate authenticity, to communicate more clearly, and to build connections based on mutual respect and genuine connection.
Powerful stuff. And it leaves our listeners with a thought-provoking question. How can you apply these insights to create more authentic and fulfilling connections in your own life?
It's a journey of self-discovery,
It is.
and the rewards are well worth the effort.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next time for another exploration into the complexities of human behavior.